Sup nerds! Today we're going to be talking about some vertical handhelds. When I say vertical emulation handhelds, a lot of people will probably think about the Miyoo Mini or the RG35XX because those are what are popular right now, maybe even the TrimUI Brick, and that's cool and all, but when I talk about the very first one that really was emulation wise, because there were many even like way early on that could play the 8-bit Nintendo pre-installed games on there, but as far as actual emulation, things that you could put your own ROMs and then take out and whatnot, the very first one, a lot of the people who are new to the hobby might think Miyoo Mini, but that's not the case obviously. And some of you who have been here longer might even think back to the BitBoy, and that one definitely was quite popular back in its days. But I'm here to tell you that there was one that came even before, and possibly what started not only the vertical handheld craze, but also the micro handheld craze, at least as far as emulation handhelds go. And so today, I'm here to talk about the RetroMini. The RetroMini. That's right, a very generic name, but this tiny thing was most likely the very first mini Game Boy form factor. As you can see, it only had 2 face buttons, but it did have a L and R quote buttons on there. The ones nowadays, of course, they are much better in form factor. They're much more comfortable to play. This one was not too bad, but also this was very uncomfortable. The space between here was very small as well. Even for people with smaller hands, this was not very comfortable to hold. The D-pad was okay, not the best, but for a mini console, it was decent. The select and start were mushy and not clicky, but still, the general Game Boy form factor was there. It was fantastic. They did catch that pretty well, and this was far back enough that it didn't really have one brand. They did manufacture this quite a bit, and then different companies would rebrand them and then sell them as their own. Just the RetroMini, I know that Datafrog had sold this, and there were a few other companies back then that sold it, but some of those are long gone, moved on to making their own handhelds instead of just rebranding and selling stuff like this. But yeah, back then, even some of the later handhelds like the RS97, which was very popular, not only Datafrog and Powkitty, but even Embernic was rebranding and selling those. That's how long ago these are from. And I say long ago, but really it was like 2017, 2016, 2017. So the history of emulation handhelds with these brands don't go that far back. It is not like the Dingu that I showed before. That was from 2009 and 2010. Datafrog, Powkitty, Embernic, those go back to like 2017, 2016. And the RetroMini was one of the first ones there. Definitely the first Game Boy form factor that actually allowed you to put different ROMs in it, and even a custom firmware at some point. But yeah, that is that. It does have a on and off switch here on the side, a volume dial here, which it's pretty cool. I do like having a dial instead of the buttons, but it is what it is. It did have a headphone jack and a micro USB instead of the mini USB that a lot of the handhelds even after this one had. So I do think this kind of showed that people really were trying with this handheld. They were trying to make it more compact. They were trying to make it more modern. They did move on from this pretty quickly, but it is still fantastic to see. I think it was one of the first emulation handhelds that did have a micro USB instead of a mini USB. And on this side, it did have the micro SD slot. As you can see, I did have a 4GB one on there, which is interesting because I didn't put that many games on this. And as you can see, it is direct micro SD slot and not a mini USB slot like a lot of the handhelds back then did have. So just like the charger port that I mentioned, they were trying to modernize emulation handhelds with this. The battery here was a old cell phone battery, a Nokia battery, which a lot of people liked having because, as you saw, we can take the cap out and just change the battery. That said, The batteries, these kind of batteries were very finicky. They weren't the original cell phone batteries. They were cheap Chinese knockoff. So as you can see, even with this one, it did bloat pretty easily and then stop charging eventually. Mine, this one specific, is not charging anymore either. It's not great. I can easily buy a replacement battery, but a lot of people who buy the replacement battery, they do mention that after charging once, it gets bloated again. So, you know, it is finicky. It's a gamble to buy these kind of batteries to replace. But yeah, you can see the PCB under there, the ribbon cable for the screen and all. It was decent. It was okay. Nicely built. I did like it. The plastic wasn't too bad. It did, of course, feel really light, but it was one of those first ones that when you held it, it didn't feel too cheap, you know? Not as cheap as a lot of the ones that came after this that were the opposite of it. And I do have one to show here. This one, I'm not sure what the name of this is, but it is definitely a vertical form factor as well. As you can see, it doesn't have a D-pad. It has this little, like those PSP analog nubs. That said, not only does it go directional, but this part on top also spins, which I'm not sure why they did that, but it definitely made this much harder to control with that spinning on top. It's that's a terrible design. It did have 4 face buttons, A, B, C, D. A, B, C, D going counterclockwise, which is a little bonkers to think about a layout like that. But it didn't have any L&R. The speaker also was at the center in the back, which is an interesting placement as opposed to the speaker being up front here, like on this one. The plastic on this did feel a lot cheaper than the RetroMini. The screen size was somewhat similar. It did have a micro SD slot as well, which was fantastic. A power switch here on and off. Also a battery compartment that you can take off. The battery here though was different, was not the same one, but it was just as finicky. As you can see, this one is bloated as well, also not charging anymore. So, you know, it is what it is. But the build quality of this one was a lot finicky. It did have a mini USB slot again, not a micro one. It did have a volume dial as well, which was nice, and a headphone jack on the side, which these two being on the side, I'm not a huge fan of, because if you're gonna play, you will be playing games like this. So it did get in the way if you had cables on the side. So having it at the bottom like this one was definitely thought out better, pre-planned better, whereas this perhaps was just an afterthought, or maybe they didn't test it out. It did have a little hole here, which I assume is a microphone hole. They do have a select and start here, but also another button here, which you might be wondering, what does it do? And for that, I will plug it in just to show you. So as you can see, these holes are the charging LED. It does show that I'm fully charged and charging, but yeah. So this button right here, it had a flashlight on there. Like, why do you need this on a handheld? I'm not too sure, but it did have this. And if you notice, it does have an image on there, and it is of a killer whale, which is very random, but very cool at the same time. I don't... Why do you need this on a handheld? I'm not too sure. Why did they think this was a feature? I'm not too sure, but it is there. That is actually one of the brands that were rebranding different handhelds and putting them out there back then. So I wonder if different handhelds had different images on them. It's just that the one I got did have this on there. It's it's super random, but I did enjoy playing around with this. It is what it is. But yeah, these are two different handhelds, but they use not only the same chip, but also the exact same firmware. But like I said, build quality wise, the RetroMini was a lot better. So that's why I'm inclined to say that this was the first one of its kind, and what did influence later on the BitBoy, which was a lot more popular than this, and eventually the Miu Mini and so on. That said, in the firmware that it had, it could only run GBA games. Now, of course, a lot of people have figured out that you can format Game Boy Color and Game Boy games to be a GBA file so that you could run those in here as well. But if you didn't know how to mess with that, then you were most likely stuck with just GBA games. That said, like I showed you, you can put more GBA games than just what is in the handheld through the micro SD. So you could have the entire library of the Game Boy Advance in here with a card like this. So it was fantastic. It was a fantastic Game Boy Advance little handheld, little machine. And it did only have 2 face buttons and LNR. So perfect for Game Boy Advance, not much else. Okay, so there you go. I did plug it in and then it turns on. So as you can see, it's only the battery that's the problem. The screen also, it's a little darker than I remember, but for the most part, if I switch out the battery, then it will be back. As you can see, it does feel quite similar to the Dingu menu because this does have also a Ingenic chip. The last 2 numbers of the Ingenic is different. The Dingu one ended with 32 and this one ends with the 25. I'm not too sure what the difference is. I'm not sure if those numbers are the order in which they came out, but they're both Ingenic and they did both have 32 megabytes of RAM. So much so that, like I mentioned, the community did make a custom firmware for this later on. I don't have it in here, and I'm honestly not really inclined to put it on here because, like I said, I don't have a working battery on this. Even if I were to put a firmware on this, I assume the performance would be much like the Dingu A320, which didn't improve that much, and there are many handhelds out there now that just do better out of the box. So let's just take a look. System settings, desktop set. Oh, I think this is the theme. Yeah, this is the themes. Desktop set. Backlight luminance, you can change the brightness. Yeah, so you can change the brightness. Backlight time. Languages. Sound. 2 seems fine. System function. This is factory reset, I think. But notice they didn't have a device info. So we don't know like the firmware and whatnot. It's just what it is. File manager, SD card, U-disk. As you can see, I did have more games on here that I added on the micro SD. Ebook, like I said, this is, I think it just read text. Yeah, it reads text files. It's not really like an actual ebook thing. Pictures. Did they have pictures? For a second, I was kind of getting scared that it might be something weird. But yeah. Just random space rendering, which is kind of cool, I guess. Video, play on, display mode, show control bar. I don't know what. Super DJ? This probably has copyright, so I won't be playing it. But yeah, you could put those. They had music in here that you could play on the California. All right. If you go to the game tab, then you see that there's no like emulators or anything. It just shows you the games. The games that are already in here, they were numbered. Pokemon Emerald, Super Mario. And it shows a picture of the DS one or the Wii one or whatever this one is, but it wasn't that. It was the Game Boy Advance one. Mario Kart, Super Mario Advance, Super Mario World 2, Metal Slug Advance, Golden Sun, Camp Fighters, Donkey Kong Country 2, Crash Bandicoot, Four Swords, and Link to the Past, Harvest Moon, Castlevania, Mega Man and Bass, Contra, Sonic the Hedgehog, CT Special Forces, pretty fun game. Final Fight 1. FIFA. I did show on my very first handheld video here that I did have a original cartridge of one of those. I never played it. Bomberman, Advance Wars, fantastic. Pac-Man. So yeah, even just out of the box, it did have a decent collection here. And Rebel Star, I haven't seen this one in a while. As you can see, it wasn't a extravagant exaggeration number that they put on there like 2001. There were actually 40 different Game Boy Advance games that you could play. So it was a nice selection. They had several different kinds of games. The first few that they show are of course the more popular ones. So you could have a lot of fun with this back then, even just out of the box. I did like it quite a bit. And then if you go to the SD card here, it won't show. You did have to go to the file manager and go select through there and they would show. I did put a lot of the games that I was into at the time. I did play through Medabots Rokusho version on this back then and it was one of my favorites. I did like it quite a bit. You could see there was some yellowing on the screen, which definitely wasn't there before. But yeah, there was a slight frame drop when it screamed Medabots. The speakers are pretty good, as you see. This is volume 2, not 3. You can make it louder, and you can... And that's why I like the dial, because you choose how low you want it to be, right? Fantastic game. I did used to like this quite a bit. As you see, despite the little frame rate drop at the beginning when he screamed Medabots, there's not much issues playing the game here. Out of the games that I tried here, I think only Kingdom Hearts had issues with the beginning intro. But you know, it is expected from a handheld that is using such an old chipset and only 32 megabytes of RAM. For the most part, it did play everything you wanted to. It did play everything. Since you could only play GBA games, like I said, you can put custom firmware on this, play other emulators, but for someone like me who has a few other emulation handhelds that can do everything that this can, I don't really feel inclined to mess with this, especially because I don't have a working battery on here. I'm not really messing around this anymore. But yeah, I don't know if you can hear, but the sound lags up a little bit in a few instances of the song. So it is not running at 100%. That's why in this device I did stick mostly to turn-based. But yeah, even if you just do turn-based, there's so many games you could play on this. All the Pokemons, Final Fantasy, Breath of Fire, all of that stuff, you know, it worked great. It was a fantastic little device. If you press select and start at the same time, you could have save state options. So it definitely was a emulation handheld instead of one of those cheap throwaway handhelds that only had a few Nintendo games on there that you couldn't even save, you know. So definitely was one of the better ones. And the way I see it, definitely what started this whole genre of vertical mini-sized emulation handheld. And here, as you can see, like I mentioned, they do use the same firmware. I do have a different background on this, but you can see that the menu is the same. It's just that the screen on this one is a lot worse. But yeah, let's go to system settings, this cable. And this one did freeze just now. So yeah, there you go, NetPez. Okay, so this one you can see it did say 10,000 in one, which is definitely a lot. It does show 10,000 here. If it doesn't skip, then I assume there will be a lot of repeats on there. But yeah, let's go to system settings, desktop set. If we go to 4, was it? Yeah, if you see this, then it is the exact same background. Yeah, there is some kind of light loss at the center of this. You can see it turns blue over here. So yeah, I do think the screen on this was slightly worse. Maybe it's starting to have a screen burn. I'm not too sure. Did it freeze again? I think it froze again. Okay, so it's not recognizing the micro SD that I have on there. Try to see. It does say it's an 8 GB one. I can barely see it though. It's very faded. It might be a dead micro SD. I'm not too sure. Even the RetroMini couldn't do things 100%. I assume things like Need for Speed won't work on this that well. But we can see. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. Yeah, but controlling the car in this weird analog thing, it's terrible. But you can definitely tell that it is not running at 100%. But it is not too bad actually. For how cheap this device had been even back then, it's not too bad. For a flashlight device, it's definitely not too bad. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. You can see it is the exact same firmware. But yeah, we saw that Need for Speed way down there in 90,000 something, in 9,000 something. So yeah, a lot of repeats on this. Definitely there aren't 10,000 games in GBA. It did play okay. Like we all know now, Game Boy Advance games are not that hard to emulate. So even this not so serious emulation handheld that people use as a flashlight of a killer whale could run Game Boy games pretty well, and these kind of devices were what started this whole thing. And this one in particular being very well made, very great form factor, great buttons, everything about this is much better and just really nice. This is the grandfather of all mini vertical handhelds out today. All hail RetroMini. Also known as the RS90, and that is a name that we will keep in mind because the next video that we'll talk about is the RS97. Back when it came out in 2017, was possibly the best Linux-based handheld. So that is what we'll talk about in the next video, the big brother of the RetroMini, also known as the RS90. And yeah, that's what I had to show you today. It was just mostly a look back. Hello Kitty. It was mostly a look back to this form factor. Like I said, I could get a replacement battery for this and get it working again. I could put a custom firmware on it, but like I said, I don't see much incentive to do that because as they are right now, they only play Game Boy Advance games, and you know, if it's going to do that, I do even have my Game Boy Advance SP with a flash card in it. Even if it is one of the worst flash cards in the world, it does have a flash card on it, so I can play all the Game Boy Advance games that I want in the official hardware, which I do think it's better. At least it runs everything at 100%, whereas here it runs quite well but not 100%. And so I don't really see the point in spending money to replace the batteries. Of course, they're not that expensive to change. That would just be another amount that I would be spending and not gaining much out of it. So, you know, at this point in time, I'm more inclined to leave them as they are. They are currently more of a collection pieces to me at this point in time, a reminder of how far we have come in emulation handheld, but not much more than that. The flashlight is pretty cool though. And so, yeah, that is what I had to show you today. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider helping out the channel by clicking join down below. Subscribe to see more videos like this and of other collection videos, usually in-game stuff. And of course, always nerd on.